on this film, went to IMAX and said, if ever we were going to do an entire film on IMAX, this is the film we should do it. So for me, it's really about a compelling narrative, giving the audience an involving time at the movies. For me, the Odyssey is a foundational text of Western literature. So first and foremost, it's one of the great adventure stories of all time. And it's a story that has fascinated generation after generation for almost 3,000 years. As a filmmaker, you're looking for a gap in movie culture. You're looking for something new that you can bring to audiences. And it was quite striking to me to realize that the world of Greek mythology had never really been addressed in a modern cinematic sense. And that's exactly the kind of opportunity you're looking for as a filmmaker. So I dove in really with the specific ambition of trying to bring one of the great adventure stories to a modern audience in a way that they could really feel connected with and really feel that they're a part of in a way. I think studying English literature at university certainly gave me an appreciation for the wide range across time of storytelling and how storytelling changes in its specifics and in its methods, but that the things that last have some kind of underlying truth or underlying human relevance. And when I came to look at the poem of the Odyssey with a view to adapting it as a film, I found a lot that was very relatable. To me, the poem it's earthy and accessible, and I wanted to tell it in a very grounded way that would bring that out for audiences. Because I think that when we look at the literature of the past, too often we sort of put it on a pedestal and we treat it with too much reverence in a way. The challenge and the fun really of this adaptation, this story, is to try and give the audience the experience in a film of what it is to read the poem and read it as a fresh story experience. First and foremost, it's an adventure story, but it's also a story about love. It's a story of coming of age, and very importantly, it's a story of homecoming. That was very important to the people at the time at which the poem was written. But I think the reason the poem has sustained interest all this time is because a lot of what it deals with are universal truths. They're just things that are as relevant and important to us today as they were 3,000 years ago. Yeah, I mean, I think every time you choose a story, there are a lot of different considerations that go into choosing a story. Certainly in the case of the Odyssey, the characters, the specifics of the story and the situation were what drew me to it, but also creating a world. And the world of the film, the world I get to create in the film, this Bronze Age storytelling, that's something I'd never done before. And I felt I could bring that in a fresh way to the cinema screen. So I think when you're looking for a story, there are lots of different things that will draw you to it. But really the characters and the emotions, it's a balance between the characters and the emotions and the world of the cinematic world that you're going to get to create. And I'm always looking to do something that I haven't done before. So certainly there'll be all kinds of stories in one world. I've worked on contemporary stories and I've worked with stories in the past and indeed in the future. So for me, it's really about a compelling narrative, giving the audience an involving time at the movies. I think one of the very first things that I decided to do with the film was to have the character of the Bard, who's played by Travis Scott. It was very important to me to introduce the idea of storytelling, because the Odyssey is a poem about storytelling. And I wanted very much to, in a way, pay tribute to the idea of a story that's passed down through oral formulaic poetry, a story that's been passed down from bard to bard in verbal telling before it's written down, which is really what most people think at this point was the way in which the Odyssey was eventually written down. They think it is a story that was passed down through different times and different cultures through oral repetition. And so it felt important, and it was one of the earliest things I decided on, that I wanted to begin with that. What's very important in the poem at times is the idea of Odysseus hearing his story, having become mythology, having become a song that people recite. And so I really wanted to kick off with that and introduce the idea that Telemachus, in particular, he's receiving this idea of who his father is, a father he can't remember. That he's receiving this idea of his father and his mythology of his father through song, through poetry. It's been very inspiring to work on the IMAX format, and it's been really gratifying to be part of a technological evolution in that. The format, the film format itself, was invented the year before I was born. It's been around a long time, but it had never been used in Hollywood filmmaking, Hollywood storytelling, until we decided to do that for The Dark Knight. It's something I'd wanted to do since I first saw IMAX films at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago when I was a kid. I was really only about 16 years old, I think. And it's a desire I carried with me all this time. The issue with incorporating IMAX technology has always been that the cameras are very large and heavy. They're also very, very noisy because they're moving a huge amount of film very quickly through the gate. And so from The Dark Knight onwards, we tried to use the cameras as much as we could, but really we were limited to the action sequences. On this film, went to IMAX and said, if ever we were going to do an entire film on IMAX, this is the film we should do it with. So can you find a way to make the cameras quieter? And what they were able to produce for us was a blimping system, essentially a big high-tech box that you put the camera in. It silences the camera, and then we were able to shoot the dialogue scenes. And so at that point we realized we could do the entire film that way. What I love about shooting on large format film is it's the best analogy for the way the eye sees. And so if you're interested, as I am, in bringing an audience into the story, it's the best format to do that. And it's really wonderful for me to be able to do that throughout the entire film rather than having to choose sections and move between formats. I think filmmaking is all in stages. So finishing shooting in IMAX definitely felt like the completion of a very long-held ambition. But then, of course, we had to edit the film and cut those negatives and print it. And so at every stage, there's been a nice sense of completion. Right now, the film is going out, people are seeing it all around the world, and that to me is when the film is really finished. And so showing the film, releasing the film in Korea, for example, it comes out on Wednesday. I make the film for the theatrical audience. They finish the film for me, they tell me what the film is. It's really about the audience response. And then I think the journey will feel complete. Well, I mean, there are different uses and different forms of technology, and we avail ourselves of all kinds of technology, all the latest tricks and everything. But what I've always tried to retain in my filmmaking is a concern for the tonality. And so, because we're shooting in real places, on real locations, as we try to embrace the fantasy elements of the story, as we need to move beyond what we can possibly achieve in camera, what I try to do, working with my visual effects team, is to photograph as much as possible for them to work with to produce the more fantastical elements. And that's all really a desire on my part to maintain the tone of the film. I think audiences are very, very sensitized to tone, to the feeling of, are we really someplace real? Are the actors standing someplace real? Or is it an animated world? And it's perfectly valid and perfectly viable to make more artificial more animated films, what I choose to do is create a more realistic tone. The challenge then is to try and find methods that will allow you to continue that through the sequences where you have to use visual effects. That's a hard question to answer, because for me, the discipline is always to concentrate on one film at a time. So I try not to view each film I do as part of a wider body of work or part of a journey that I'm on. I try to just look at the film in isolation, because that's how the audience receives the film. I mean, yes, you have fans who are aware of your previous films, or you have film critics and people who write about movies who are aware of that. But in general, I have to make films for an audience member who doesn't care who directed the film. They just care about the story. And so I really try not to view my work in any kind of continuity with other films. So I find it very hard to give you an answer for that question.